Welcome back to Politics on the Prairie. I'm your host, Dan Williams, and today we'll be going over the recent Oklahoma County Clerk election results. Now, I wanted to do a little bit more of an in-depth map series, but I wanted to get this map out first so we would have something to jump off of in future map series. But as we can see here, we have the results from last night, 4-4. Between the general election between Marissa Treat, the Republican, and Derek Scobie, the Democrat. Marissa Treat ended up winning, as we can see here, by about 3.7%, or about 1,500 votes. And what I wanted to go over here is that dynamics of the race change from the primary electorates, and then low turnout of it all, right? So actually, let's cover this in reverse order and talk about low turnout. Now, as we can see here, there are about 42,000 votes cast in Oklahoma County, more or less. The thing of it is anybody familiar with Oklahoma County is that there's much more than just 42,000 voters in this county. In the previous election we had here, just recently in 3/7 on March 7th, we had over 101,000 votes cast regarding recreational marijuana. So this is a significant drop off from that. Now this is more votes than was cast in the initial primary. About 28,000 votes were cast during that. But still, only about 10% of the whole registered universe in Oklahoma County turned out, which led to some pretty weird results in some places that we'll go over. Derek Scobie, the Democrat, was a black candidate, as we can see here. He did pretty well on the east side, whereas Marissa Treat is a suburban Republican. We can see that she did well in her home turf in northwest OKC and Edmond. So let's go into the dynamics a little bit more. So the big thing here is we can see that there's widespread support for either candidate, but something that this map's not going to show that I wanted to wait to display but decided to get this results map out earlier is net vote. I think that's really important here. Once we look at the shift map in the future, it might look that some precincts got more Democratic or some precincts got more Republican since the primary election, but what matters here is net vote getting change. Like, for instance, some of these east side precincts, technically, percentage-wise, got more Republican. Marissa Treat got more votes than she did in the primary and made up a higher percentage. But the net vote for Derek Scobie was a lot higher. That's the same case in a lot of these Edmond precincts up here, whereas the percentages moved a little bit towards Mr. Scobie. The net vote was more beneficial to Mrs. Treat here. As far as the internal dynamics go, we have the usual coalitions present in Oklahoma County, with East Side being very Democratic, majority black, downtown being very Democratic, and sort of the beginnings of the Nazarene Corridor and the Hefner Corridor, with Eastern Oklahoma County being very Republican, Bethany area being very Republican, Edmond being very Republican, and Northwest Oklahoma County being very Republican. Now here's where the coalitions are a little different. Southside is much more Republican than it usually is. Looking at the numbers last night in Southside, I can tell that this area was much lower turnout than it usually is, compared to even, the recreational election. This area was much lower turnout. But it does seem to be that there's some shifts going on there towards the Republicans. And then Middale is a little bit more of a mixed bag than usual. Generally, the vote there is a little segregated, with the black areas voting for Democrats and the white areas voting for Republicans, but this is kind of all over the place because this area had much lower turnout in general compared to the county at large. Some other dynamics to be aware of is that this area here, Choctaw, and this area here, Edmond, both had local elections for city council and mayor. Now, there was a bit of here, Southside, Oklahoma City, that had a Ward 5 election, but that election was pretty low turnout compared to the juice turnout really in Edmond. Going in further into the race dynamics here, it came down to a story of net votes. While percentage changes affected both candidates in many different ways, with Derek Scobie overperforming the registration lead of the county and overperforming a lot of the places he did in primary, Mr. Cheat overperforming some other places in the primary. It really came down to the net vote some of these precincts were turning out. Like, for instance, this area up here in near county line up in northern Edmond, obviously Scobie lost it pretty by a large percentage margin in the primary election. Or they weren't actually facing each other, but more Republicans turned out. However, this time around, it wasn't just necessarily that more Republicans turned out, it was the magnitude of net vote really produced. And I know I'm really hammering on this topic, but I want to really highlight this is what it comes down to in a lot of these elections, is that precinct percentages may be more favorable, but the net vote some people are getting out of some areas is just insurmountable. A lot of these Edmond precincts produced hundreds of votes, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you look at Middale precincts that are producing dozens of votes, Southside precincts that are producing dozens of votes, the fully functional turnout machine of Edmond under competitive city council elections and a mayoral election, coupled with active campaigning up there by the Treat campaign, makes for a lot of turnout in this area. This is the same story in the northern Hefner corridor, especially around the Quail Creek area. One of the things I'd like to point out here is that this region right here is Senator Treat, Greg Treat, Marissa's husband, is his Senate district right in this area of the county. And as we can see, while there are some precincts that Marissa lost, there's a lot of precincts that she won, and she was netting a lot of votes out of these precincts. Now that's not to say Scobie didn't net a lot of votes out of other precincts. A lot of the East Side precincts that didn't really turn up in the primary election, initial primary election in February, did net a lot of votes for the Scobie campaign. I'd like to highlight that this was only a 3.7% loss. The loss is still a loss, of course, but generally Democrats lose Oklahoma County by anywhere from 5 to 10 points on average. If you look at the 2022 elections, there are only, I think, 4 candidates to carry Oklahoma County, with the composite of the county being right around this lean, a little bit redder for 2022 and even for 2018. So that's something to keep in mind. These close elections hurt a lot more, in my opinion, if you're a Democrat. Of course, my Republicans in the audience, you're getting kind of nervous that Oklahoma County is getting closer. But if you're a Democrat and you just keep barely missing the mark, that does hurt a lot more, I guess, for the Democrats. But the county is becoming more competitive as on a whole, so it's something definitely to watch. The big dynamics that are emerging here is that Middale is becoming a mixed region with a lower turnout compared to the county. East Oklahoma County is really growing and starting to produce a lot of votes out here, and it's still remaining pretty red. Edmond may be inching towards Democrats, but they're still netting a lot of votes for Republicans. Southside is very low turnout, but is starting to shift towards Republicans a bit, which is interesting to see how this is going to play in 2024, to see if the Hispanic lurch towards the right that we saw nationwide ends up happening in Southside. There's some internal things going on in Southside. I think the RNC opened up a Hispanic Outreach Center in the Southside, and it seems to be having some effects here. Going on over here into the Nazarene Corridor in southwest Oklahoma County. Remember, I mentioned these regions in my other video about the Oklahoma County breakdown. You can see these areas are pretty red still, and that efforts for Democrats to kind of spread into this area are slow going. Now, of course, when we did our little little video on the Tale of Two Districts, I showed that this area in particular was becoming more Democratic, and we can kind of see that here, though some of these precincts come back to Republican. A bit of note, this is being a lower turnout election. This data is a bit noisy. What does that mean? It can be a bit chaotic, a bit random. If you see an election result that hey, that makes you scratch your head. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Could have to do with the turnout environment. Just wanted to preface that. But overall, it really came down to a story of who had the local elections where to benefit them. And Democrats didn't have any local elections to really benefit them this time around. There was in the primary election, again, these candidates didn't face off, but there's still things to think about. We had Ward 2, we had Ward 6 in Oklahoma City, we had Ward 8, where Amy Warren's campaign overperformed what you would normally expect a Democrat in Ward 8 to do. And you saw that there was increased Democratic turnout in these areas. And you've looked at the combined turnout, Democrats won a lot of these precincts that they normally didn't. And they were also getting a lot more raw votes out of this downtown region. A lot of the downtown areas, even high voting areas like Mesta Park, saw lower turnout compared to February, which probably really hurt the Scobie campaign. Whereas, like I've previously mentioned, Edmond having all those elections on the ballot, pretty competitive elections too, and Treat focusing a lot of their campaign, Treat's campaign focusing a lot there, really drove out turnout. So as we continue forward with Oklahoma County's coalitions continuing to change, things that both sides are going to have to be really aware of is just where are the net votes? Where are the engaged where's the engaged electorate? So while there's a lot of blue on this map and a lot of red, there needs to be the story of where is the net vote coming from. And in my next video, I'm really going to be highlighting this by actually shooting a video and of a 3D map to show the amount of raw votes coming out of each precinct. Anyway, I know this episode's been a little rushed. I wanted to get this map out and just been running short on time recently because got a lot of stuff to do, but I really thank everyone for watching. This will be a free video, but anybody that tunes into this, please subscribe to my Patreon. We'll be going into this race a lot more in depth with 3D maps, age turnout, partisan turnout, all the fancy stuff that I specialize in. I've got registration stuff coming down the pipeline. Tune in to Politics on the Prairie to get your fill on Oklahoma political knowledge. Thank you very much for tuning in. I've been Dan Williams, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.